I'm Dr. Susan Eyrich, and welcome to this conservation conversation. These conversations are designed to contemplate our collective journey together and how best we can find and then maintain our individual paths. The ultimate goal is action arising from a shift in perception that all life is sacred, and creating a community of practice that grows and supports each other through our actions. We're delighted you're here. I went to a retreat, just 20 people in a circle for a weekend. We did it in March, and we did it again in the fall equinox, called Reversing Extinction. And the idea was to try and go as deeply as we can in a small, intimate group with what are we doing and why, and how can we change things. It went from quite practical out to the very interesting idea that maybe there's some way to even bring back species. I know genetically it's conceivable possibly, but also energetically, people say the energy forms of species that have disappeared are still circling the Earth. I don't know. But it was a range of attempts to really understand and come to grips with what we're doing. And I do agree that we often come up with the best ideas in small, intimate groups. That's who we are as human beings, originally tribal, small, intimate groups where we can go pretty deep. 3 of the questions that came up that people were asking, and was in the description. What part is missing from our deep memory? With the idea that our deep memory is one that is connected with nature and wouldn't be doing these things. What part is missing from our deep memory? One of the questions that struck me the most was, what are we colliding against when we try to make change? What are we colliding against? Is it ourselves, our brain structure, our evolutionary history, larger forces in us of good and evil or creation and destruction? We keep coming up against stuff. What is it we're colliding against? And the third question that struck me so strongly was, what agreements are we not willing to make? An example, and that's a general question. It could be an agreement to consume less. It could be an agreement to, what I think we need to do is make a 180-degree flip in our values, in what we see as important. 180 degrees, completely upside down. So everything we consider, obviously not family and that kind of thing, but everything we consider important now, jobs, certain social structures, culture, everything, we have to reevaluate. We don't give proper weight and meaning to nature, to trees, to life, to being really careful, full of care with what we do and how we use things. We don't give enough weight. What we give weight to is flipped as a culture. And without that sudden flip, it has to be pretty sudden, we're going to be in really serious trouble. The other side of it is, if we do that 180-degree flip, we not only have a chance to get out of everything that we're in, or a lot of what we're in, there's a chance for a really joyous life, or all life. But can we do it? What agreements are we not willing to make? There was a woman at the conference, a lovely woman, who was running in the woods in Hawaii and stopped She was working in a regular job at a university, and she stopped on a bridge to do some yoga stretches on the edge of the bridge. And as she was doing the stretching, suddenly she felt like this whoosh, and the trees and the wind and the river all told her really clearly, a sudden, really insight. Everything has to change. She literally stopped, ran home, quit her job, and has been working since then for sustainability. But as we talked, I realized, and she agreed as we talked, that in many ways she hadn't made any fundamental shifts, even with the power of that insight, with the trees and the wind and the river coming to her and saying everything has to change. She did change, to her credit. It's a big change to change your job and your dissertation and all that kind of stuff. But on a fundamental level, she was still living the same life that we all are, really. So what's it going to take? Quite a few people, thinkers from different traditions, say we humans are in a trance. Some people say we're in a trance from, in Buddhism, they say we're in a trance from temptation and the Mara, the angers, jealousy, and that kind of thing. Other people would say we're in a trance that we just haven't woken up yet. Many different explanations. But in a sense, you can say we are, because we don't understand, we have the brain for understanding the consequences, but we continue doing it, continue getting caught and blindly going ahead with our lives. Now, everyone on this call and people listening to this call do it less so, but we all still do it. It seems to be a human quality. So we all get scattered, and we get scattered by all the pressures on us. If we can collect ourselves with whatever meditative practice we can do, if we can collect ourselves and calm ourselves, then we begin to get access to a fundamental intelligence that's very, very deep. But it's very, very difficult for us to do, given the pressures of modern life. So I guess so what mode of consciousness do we choose to operate in? What level? The beta level of consciousness, busy, busy, busy. Alpha, creative. Theta, very deep. Where do we operate from? And perhaps as a culture, which one will we work to activate differently? So we have the time and the space to consider the consequences, to understand the consequences. But that's more intellectual, to also feel the care that we need to feel for other life. How do we support one another as a culture shift so that we're coming from that level of consciousness, which is universally available to all of us, but cultures and other things help us operate from levels that may not be so productive, or productive isn't quite the right word. And then the last question in my mind that I've been thinking about for a while, are we a glorious but failed experiment? Or we're a failed but glorious experiment? Are there other planets where there's intelligence developing? And the incredible, incredible, wonderful things that we have and can do as humans. That's the glorious part. But we keep coming up against something. What are we colliding against? What agreements are we not willing to make? Will we have been a failed experiment with another species somewhere else? Perhaps we were a beginning, and there need to be a few more human races before we make it. I don't know any of it. None of us do. But those are the things I've been thinking about since that retreat. So at this point, I will open it to discussion.
Thank you, Susan. So I will give you all the ability to unmute yourself. And since it's just 4 of us tonight, we don't have to be as mindful with time and in our comments. But please feel free to share. And I'll start you muted, but yeah, you should be able to unmute yourself now. It's a bottom left corner, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, Joanna.
Yes. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about some of the stuff you're talking about. And I'm going to sort of, I guess, answer in a variety of ways. One is if we look at the people who are studying human communication and language, particularly, because we're limited by our language, right? And you say, what do we keep colliding against? And, and I think that's a really important question. And I know this is going to sound terrible when I say it, but the research would show in the speech communication areas and in some of the education areas about learning concepts that only about 30% of adults reach formal level of thought, Susan. And when you go back to the ideas of pre-operational and concrete and formal level of Erik Erikson's kind of like thinking, and you put that stair step way along with the helix of learning, that I think that the social media has really found a way to glom on to with these sound bites and people not wanting to really delve into what are the issues, right? They just hear something and they somehow just make an opinion without hearing all of the facts. And I think that has really fits into the rule-based thinking, which is what we see at concrete level of thinking, and problem solving really comes at a higher level. And so when you ask these questions that you're asking, I mean, they're rich and they're wonderful, but I think there's just a lot of people who don't know how to engage in that, and they don't have the opportunity to, because if you ask them, they have opinions, but they're not based in research, they're not based in a whole lot of other stuff. So I find that the downside of your question. And I remember my dad saying to me when I was getting out of college back in the 70s, and he would say something like, well, you may have this, back then $10,000 education, but you have no wisdom. And he would say, I, who have a GED, I have a lot of wisdom. And, it's going to take you a long time to get there. And so now that I'm 68, my sister and I keep asking ourselves, do you think we're wise yet? But I think that there's something to it as human beings, that the sophistication of the questions you're asking are not something that people sit and really engage with. And if I had not taken my shaman path, and if I hadn't retired, like I'm taking off tomorrow and I'm going down to the redwoods in the coastal redwoods, and people said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just going to hang with the trees. So I'm going down there, I've got a cabin in the middle of the woods for 7 days, and I'm just going to sit down there. And that's what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to listen. So you say what's missing, and I think our ability to listen and our ability to stay still and our ability to really sit down and say, what's the song of that tree? And to really listen to what that is. But I have the time to do that because I'm retired and I can do it. And I can take off when I so want to do that. And I think that really is important, that time is a consideration. And so I don't know, I don't have the answers. I know I'm thinking a lot here, but I just really think that information is, we've talked about climate change, but I don't think people really begin to hear us, right? And so you have to say, why not? And I'm not sure that they really want to hear us, because it's just a problem that they can't solve, and it raises too many issues. So they don't know how to solve that. They're just not willing to do it, or they're not willing to do simple things like drink out of a steel coffee cup instead of, paper, and all the simple kinds of things that we can do. I think when I listen to people, It's really hard to get them there. Plus, I hang out with a lot of like-minded people. So it's easier for me to think at the level with which you are too, Susan, and you hang out with a lot of like-minded people I know in your groups, and so it's easier to not realize how big the problem is of people not listening. And I don't think it's because they don't care. I think it's really that they don't know where to go with that. We haven't made it simple enough. I find that as one intriguing thing. And I don't know if you know that down in I think it's Australia recently, where when they made dogs sentient, they came out and said that animals are all sentient beings. So they are fining people big time now in this one county if they are not taking their dog for a walk every day. Now, I think that is pretty amazing. That county and the people that live there are willing to put their money where their mouth is to say, it's unfair if you think your dog is, and you believe that we've passed this law that they're sentient, you can't leave them in a crate, you can't leave them in a backyard, you can't leave them in your house all day. You have to do something about it. I don't know how they're enforcing it, but I found that to be interesting too. And I don't have the answer to the glorious but failed experiment, but Neil deGrasse Tyson would say, yes, we are. And there are aliens and there are other people out there that have the answers that we don't have yet. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out about information and the ability to think and communicate and listen. I think that's where the problem is. I'm done right now.
There are only 4 of us, so you can keep talking. You don't have to worry about it.
So what do you think about that, Susan, about the communication piece, about people not the soundbite mentality, right? The Fox News mentality. It just makes things downright simple.
I think that's part of it, but I think none of us are doing everything we can.
Oh, that's for sure.
And so I'm addressing that. We can talk about the people who haven't developed to a certain level yet, but as a human, none of us are doing everything we can.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my question. What are we colliding against? So you took it at one level, which I think is valid. You took it to a level of brain development and time and stuff. But the question I was thinking about is something more basic. I don't know what it is. Kind of like I feel something there, but I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So not that there's anything, yes, about everything that you're saying, but there's something else. And I think if we don't come up with something else, a more fundamental one, we're not going to be able to solve it. That's my comment about the education. Yes, obviously I try to spend time with people who are deep thinkers because it's more interesting.
Yeah, right.
But I was having a conversation interestingly with someone else whose husband did a dissertation on moral development and formal thinking development.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can't do a certain amount of things unless you get to a formal level of development in the forebrain. And my reaction to that was, but all of us have a fundamental intelligence, a very deep fundamental intelligence that doesn't have anything to do with the developed forebrain and moral levels of development. It's an instinctive sense of caring, an instinctive sense of connection. And I think almost all humans anyway have that
Mm-hmm.
at a very basic, deep level. And we're not accessing that or attending that. And those of us who are, if you want to say, more highly developed with a formal thinking, we're still not doing it enough either. We're not attending enough. I do think time is a huge element.
Mm-hmm.
Pressures against us, of constant pressures, scatter and disintegrate and disorganize us. I think there are enormous external pressures. I still think there's something we're coming up against. And yes, I do agree that people care. I do agree that they don't know where to go often. And yet, we have this fundamental intelligence. And then, even an 8-year-old starting to develop, I can't remember the example, but solutions for plastic, and a 10-year-old, and it's there in us. They're not developed yet.
I would agree. Yeah, go ahead. No.
I'm just saying their brains haven't gotten to, you can't get to formal development until you're in late teens or 20s. How do you explain these kids? Or 8 and 10 and 12 and 16, taking incredible action, holding us accountable. Like a kid I talked about a couple of weeks ago who said, wait a minute, you guys are saying 12 years, that was a year ago. And that kid was maybe 15. His development wasn't finished yet in terms of the brain. So I think it's an easy but not complete explanation. I think for me, one of the things that speaks to me most, and Katie, please speak up anytime you want to, and Chelsea, you too. This is obviously an informal round the coffee table conversation at this point. If I had a candle, I'd hold it up. For me, it's that I think we are in a trance. I do not know why. And that we're somehow hypnotized. And I'm not talking by the media, though that's true, but the advertisers, which is really true. Again, it's something more basic. Maybe it's a developmental stage in the human journey. The Buddha tried to start 2,500 years ago to awaken, and not many people have been awakened since. That's where I start to look. Why are we in a trance, and is that part of what we're colliding against?
Well, I think on a very practical level, where the trance is simply because we've created societies that make it easier to, in a sense, act in ways that are more harmful to the earth, right? We've made it easy to fill up our cars with gas. We make it easy to shop at a supermarket and get food, flown in or transferred from wherever in mass agriculture. We subsidize things like pesticides. So what we're colliding against is, well, yes, time, that I don't think many people are willing to take the time to make those changes. But Susan, how you were talking about, we need a total 180 of how we value things. I think that is truly where the focus should be, because until we start making the environment the easy way, making organics cheaper and hiking up the price of sugar like they do in some places, and kind of flopping this, making, encouraging public transportation and then putting, charging extra for gas. I think until we do that on a societal level, a very practical thing is that most people aren't willing to give up those conveniences. And so we're colliding against this society that's built around acting harmful towards the earth because it's convenient.
And also extraordinarily stupid.
Yeah.
So are people willing to be extraordinarily stupid at their own expense 5 years, 10 years down the line? It's not just the convenience. Yes, we're all very easily tempted by that, convenience and comfort. But it's not enough. It doesn't explain enough. Why are we so dumb when we're not really? Why are we acting so dumb? Convenience is seductive, but there's a price to pay.
Well, again, I think it'll sound like a simple answer, but if you don't experience the problem, then I think sometimes you don't know how big it is, and or you just sort of hear it tangentially, and I think a lot of people don't really have a clue how big the problem is that we're talking about here. The extinction. I mean, the number of birds that are disappearing and the insects. I mean, we read about that because we're interested in that. But I think a lot of people, they don't spend time in nature, and I don't think they see that problem. I just don't think they understand it nor believe it, and they don't see how it could be different. And I know that sounds really silly, but I do think that's true, right? Um, I think it's sad. I think it's really sad. But I could think of a lot of people that might say something about, well, who cares if the insects are disappearing?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't affect me and doesn't affect my everyday life. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means down the road because they don't know how important insects are, right? And you deal that with wolves all the time, right? You know, the whole ecosystem changes when we bring wolves back in. And but people aren't willing to look at how big that is. They're not willing. They don't have any idea what it looks like. And what then they don't think they know what extinction looks like. And so therefore I don't know that I think they think it's really real. That sounds, maybe it sounds terrible, but I think that's a problem with people like me when we say that even everybody's not doing everything they could, because it's not that I don't think the problem is real, but it's not in my face all the time either. And unless I choose to sit down and put it there and think about it and muse about it and do something about it. But if it's not there every day and I don't see the problem and I don't see the crisis, you know, that's just like in healthcare, right? We know that what it takes to prevent illness, but only 20% of the people who start a health regimen or start to eat better or something will do something preventative. Whereas 80% when they're really acutely ill will do what will take action to fix it because they see it, they live it, they realize it. But if we're preventing something that we can't see, it makes it a whole lot difficult.
So in that sense, one of what we're colliding against is our very own brain structure.
Mm-hmm.
That we've not evolved far enough yet. We've got too much power for too weak a brain. Perfect. What would Neil say about that we are a failed species?
Well, I was watching something with him just the other day on a YouTube actually, and somebody said, you know, is it like are we like really the Matrix, right? That we're just all plugged into this big experiment, and his answer to that was likely yes. And I don't remember the whole context because it was just a smaller soundbite, but I would think that, I mean, he suggests that in other ways too, that there's got to be in this vast universe people or beings that are beyond us that we could learn from.
Well, but I think that gets really interesting when we start to think of intelligence, because it's the same thing that we do on Earth with animals. We don't even acknowledge the intelligence they have to the extent we should, because it's not the same as our own. So to think of that, there's this another being in the universe, or more evolved or more intelligent. I don't know if it's the same type of intelligence as we're assuming, where it's just smarter than humans. Because are there intelligent beings and life? I think that most scientists would agree that yes. The probability is just too high, right? There has to be life out there. But it's really interesting to me to try and contemplate like what actually means more intelligent than humans. Because in the same sense, there are so many beings here on this earth that are more intelligent than humans in different ways. And so I kind of like struggle with thinking about that.
I can see part of what Katie writes there. How can I see her whole comment?
If you open up the chat box, or
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay, now I can see it.
And I'm happy to say those out loud.
I know I can see them now.
Okay, great. Susan, can you read them?
Yeah, I didn't realize it was there. Hi, Katie. I'm very sorry you can't speak too. Yeah, and yes, regarding the propaganda being constant and the brainwashing being constant, and very clever propaganda. It goes right to the heart of us. And yes, you're agreeing with Chelsea about considering the intelligence of animals and other forms of nature. Yes, they do.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, if we're an experiment, like an experiment of what exactly? And does that mean that other beings, other sentient beings on this earth are a part of it with us?
When you say what does it mean exactly?
Well, not it, but in terms of how you all are discussing it, like, are we a failed experiment? I can't wrap my head around that.
I don't know. What I was thinking is, um, if you read some of Federico Fagin's stuff about how the intelligence somehow came out of the Big Bang and somehow began the ability to step back and look at itself. And then it developed down into all kinds of holograms of it. That the fundamental intelligence was an ability to look at oneself and evaluate. Um, but maybe even more than that, that intelligence itself is an innate quality of the universe. Maybe forget the other thing I said, and quite a few scientists are saying that. It's an innate quality of the universe itself. And so we're just one expression of it.
Right.
And is the universe experimenting with its intelligence in different ways of becoming itself and looking at itself, like we humans can look at ourselves and we can look at the universe a little bit at least.
Mm-hmm.
Is the universe experimenting with different forms of glory, if you will, because in many ways we are glorious except for how we screw up. And it's one of the experiments that's happening, and I don't think the die is cast yet. I think there's a possibility of us turning it around. But if not, we might have been just one of many glorious but failed experiments. Does that make it clearer?
That helps. Thank you. Yeah, very much.
There's there's a shaman group up in Canada out of Vancouver that held a whole workshop that I went to about 5 years ago, and it was that we'd forgotten our song, and so that each animal or being or spirit being, when they're born, has their own song, and that we've forgotten our song, and how do we and so we spent the whole week really just trying to reconnect with what does that sound like for us, what is, do we even know our song, and I know that that's on it's a shaman's spiritual perspective that takes a lot of faith to believe that way. But I thought it was always interesting to think about that, because I'm not sure I still even know what my song is, but I'm willing to listen for it, and I'm willing to try to figure that out. And when you listen to I went on a vision quest for 5 days up on the mountain without food and water, and I could really hear the trees talking, and it made sense to me, and but it took me probably 4 days before I could hear that, before I could shut down, the busyness of my whole entire life, to really be deeply moved by being able to hear what animals had to literally say to me in my mind, and a deep sense of knowing, right? Because you have to listen differently. They're not going to speak to us in our own language. It's just that you just have to have this incredible deep sense of knowing that that's what, like the lady on the bridge, but you have to be able to really say, I know that, I know it, and I'm open to learning what you have to teach me. And I think that might be an answer, because I'm not sure everybody's really open to learning what other beings have to teach us.
So that's lovely. I personally do believe that we all have our own song. And so we could go to the beauty discussion, which would be wonderful and fun. Or we can also go into, okay, why are people not open? Because ultimately it's a lovely way to live.
Right.
So why are we closed off from the very things that would give us joy and happiness and a fulfilling life? So just saying people are not open isn't enough.
But maybe they don't know they aren't. You know, maybe they don't have any idea that they're not open. They don't know what questions to ask.
I think that's possible. And that's where we as a culture fail one another.
Hmm.
Well, and like you mentioned, Joanna, how it's very rare now for people to just sit and be
Hmm.
quiet and listen deeply, because we busy ourselves with so many outward things. What you were talking about the song, and every being, and also the earth having its own song. Are you familiar with Misa, the spirit in Mount Shasta?
Actually, I've just came from there about a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Um, this was actually something I read, Susan, in an article about Dar and Stan.
Right.
Um,
Dan
yeah,
talked about it.
hear the song of the earth while you still can. And it just talks about how the spirit in Mount Shasta, Mace Misa, is always singing. It's the song of the earth, and that we have to tune in. Basically, we have to listen, and she will continue singing for as long as we listen, even when it's quiet, and even when we, aren't so much tuning in, maybe consciously. But if we stop listening completely, that she will fade, and Earth's kind of balance will start to go out of whack. And I feel like that's slightly what's happening, right? We're seeing with the climate changing so drastically that the balance is being compromised of this system, the self-sustaining system. And because we're starting to lose that song, or we're not listening, and she's still singing, but if we stop completely, that perhaps she will fade. But hopefully, with enough people, and there are movements to tap back into that. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
That's good.
yeah.
So I see that Katie talked about that she went on a vision quest and she got messages from nature. So did this is just a question for you, Katie, when you're saying the idea of the song. So did you have this great sense of knowing that we were sort of talking about that? Um, that did it take you that whole time to learn to listen in that environment?
That thing about you said, Joanne, about we're not open, maybe that goes to the idea that somehow we're in a trance.
Hmm. Well, I remember when I first started my shaman way, and I found, like 30 or 40 feathers in very unusual places within a 4 or 5 day period of time when I was out walking or in just my neighborhood. And somebody said, well, how many times do you have to be slapped up alongside the head? As a matter of fact, they stopped giving you like 1 or 2 feathers because they didn't want to tap you on the shoulder, but they just wanted to slap you up alongside the head to say, hey, listen, come awake, pay attention, you're ready. And I've been waiting for you. So I think there's something about that it takes trust. It takes trust in
Yeah.
something you can't see or believe, or that it's not in the tangible, I guess. But
So, and
that's true about song healers. There was a group of First Nation out of Canada that their whales are what they're really connected to, and there's been this whale down in Florida that has been imprisoned for something like 35 or 40 years. And a woman up there all of a sudden heard the call of that whale down there. And they made this incredible trip down there to try to free that whale to bring it back up to Canada. But the people who owned it are not willing to do that. And, she's losing sight, she's losing her hearing and stuff. But it's because somebody was willing to listen and hear that song that was somewhere in those wavelengths or those dimensions,
yeah,
actually just hear it. And that takes a lot of faith when somebody's talking that way.
Yes. And it's a wonderful thought. A terrible, terrible story, but a wonderful thought that she heard the song and that was real and that she was moved to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, us humans are incredibly wonderful also. That's the tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
What we're capable of and the beauty and everything. What I was going to say about that woman and what you said about trust is we're a social species and we're very, we work a lot by reinforcement. Someone says something that validates us and someone else says something that makes it easier. Okay, Zachy. But in these times, difficult as it is, we may have to move ahead without validation. And in a sense, that's an individual and a human growth kind of thing, to go beyond that social stuff, go into our own deep intelligence and do something anyway, regardless. 9 times out of 10, my belief is, I don't know about the percentage, but say 9 times out of 10, my belief is that if one person does it, it helps other people do it. But the difficulty is to initiate it ourselves. And we need to do that. Somehow we need to find that courage and strength and wisdom and song and passion within us.
Mm-hmm.
Or some people might say we don't deserve to survive if we don't have the courage to do that. At least to try. We don't have to succeed, but at least to try. I'm going to let my doggy out because apparently interesting things are happening out there.
Oh, Katie did type in her vision quest.
Right.
Ah, how interesting, Katie. That it affects everyone, including spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I was at another retreat. I was just listening to the idea of human suffering, and that if you go below the level of deep meditation and human suffering, underneath it you start to connect with the nature spirits. In other words, there are other realms other than the human, but we're just very limited to seeing the human. And as you enter those they're suffering too.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess from the Buddhist point of view, suffering is inextricably involved with nirvana, samsara, nirvana, the negative and the positive, and inextricably bound up. But in another place I went to, they were talking about the nature spirits and how the nature spirits like shape a tree or shape a river. They're the framework within which the tree grows or the land grows. This goes to our permaculture stuff, Chelsea. And we're confusing them. They don't know how to hold it anymore. It's like they're the energetic framework for the physical reality.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually going to the confusing the next levels up or down, which is a really depressing thought, actually.
So, Susan, that kind of reminds me of what people say about the she, right? The fairy world, is that humans and the she shared something really very much in common, but they didn't want to deal with all the stresses that the humans actually did. So they moved off into their own realm and wanted to preserve the old ways of being able to connect with nature and kinds of work. I don't know much about the she, but I just remember that they separated off because they didn't want to either forget everything that they knew, right? So as some people think that as humans, we have volunteered to come back in this form, in this body right now, because we were willing to forget everything we'd already learned in order to try to do it again. And but then I'm going, well, if geez, it took me all the way up in my 60s to become smart enough to listen to the spirit world, boy, I guess it's not failed, but it sure did take a long time. But yeah, I worry about that, that some might be out there just pulling within themselves instead of reaching out, because the sheep seldom reach out, right? So just, I don't know where I'm going with that, but anyway. if you look at this conversation and the thing, what Katie was just writing here, that she connected with a ponderosa and that she was warm, welcoming, and supportive. And a lot of people might look at you like you were crazy, Katie, for you saying that. And you're talking to like-minded people here who really believe that trees talk to you that way. And that's a real gift. And I guess what we have to do, Susan, out of everything is just keep talking, at least to the spirit world and to the trees and to nature. And I know I talk openly and freely almost everywhere I go about how I think and feel and what I believe in my practices, because I think you can't be a closet shaman practitioner, right? You just can't walk that world quietly. And I don't care how crazy they look at me. In the grocery store line, they say, well, what are you going to do today? And I say, well, geez, I'm going to go to a fire walk, or I'm going to a this, or I'm going to a that, because I'm willing to put it out there, because I think people are really interested, but they just don't know how to think this way.
Good for you, Joanna.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's courage and important, because it makes it easy for other people to begin to think about it. Well, we all know that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. I don't know where you are up in Wyoming, but there's certainly a whole group of people up there in the Jackson Hole area that are the practicing Hathors that would believe everything you had to say. Well, Susan, I really want to compliment you for this conversation, because I look so forward to it every month, because it's just really intriguing to ask the questions, because we don't come up with the answers, but the sheer fact that we're kicking it around and keep bringing it up to the surface, for me, helps me not live my life as blindly.
Thank you.
And I really value having that kind of conversation, because it then re-energizes me to keep going out and doing the things I'm doing, or posing questions to other kind of people. But so I really want to appreciate this forum and how you open it up to people. So I really appreciate that. Makes a difference in my life.
Oh, I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
That's the point. The point is for us to help each other.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And explore together.
Mm-hmm. And Susan, did you see Katie also wrote in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading what Katie wrote.
Yeah. Yeah, we hope that Katie, if you need help, feel free to email me, because we would love to have you speaking at the next one.
Oh yeah, we'd love to have you speaking now.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, we are close to the hour.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we'd like to discuss for the evening, or feels like a good closing?
Yeah, I'm good.
It feels like we've completed something.
And yeah.
And it'll be gestating
Mm-hmm.
until the next time.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Yes, and so just really quick, thank you for being here tonight. We honor the time that you share with us, and we look forward to it every month as well. Please join our newsletter if you haven't. It's the best way to stay up to date. And then the next conversation is the third Wednesday in November. So it's always the third Wednesday. So we are, for some reason, I'm in 2020. Here we go. So that will be November 20th.
Okay.
Always at 6 p.m. And we will send out a reminder in our newsletter. But thank you both, and we look forward to seeing you both in November.
Thank you. Blessings, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Conservation Conversations are a production of the Earthfire Institute, a wildlife sanctuary and rehabilitation center whose mission is to change how people see and therefore treat wildlife and nature. Join us as we work toward becoming a committed and supportive community of all beings. Earthfire depends on your donations to continue these conversations. You can donate at our website, www.earthfireinstitute.org. The soundscapes are by Wild Sanctuary Presents, Bernie Krause and Philip Arberg. Thank you for listening. Please join us for these monthly conversations.